Good morning. Okay, raise your hand if you did not get enough sleep last night. There are many possible reasons for this. Maybe you were up late at night because you had a toddler screaming for you in the middle of the night. I know I did. Or maybe you were cranking away on that final document for work or for school. Or maybe you just got sucked in to watching another episode of The Daily Show. Okay, so now raise your hand if you are regularly not functioning at your top game because of how you slept. Okay, so as sleep deprived as we are among the lucky ones. I say that because to be here today, you need to be affiliated with Stony Brook University. That tells me that you've had the opportunity to pursue higher education. Further, to be here, you have to have the ability to make choices about how you spend your time, control over your life. Imagine how much harder it would be for you to sleep and to function if you didn't have that control over your own time. I know it's hard to put yourself in someone else's shoes, but imagine, for example, if you didn't have enough money to feed your children, how hard would it be for you to sleep? Or imagine if your crowded urban apartment was too noisy or too cold or too unsafe for you to comfortably fall asleep at night. My goal today is to get you thinking about the social patterning of sleep, why some of us are sleeping worse than others, and what the consequences are for society. In my research, I investigate the underlying causes and consequences of sleep deprivation and sleep disorders. Today, I'll share with you some of the results of my research and that of my colleagues. And I hope to convey to you why we as individuals and as a society should be deeply concerned about how we sleep and what we can do about it. So for everybody, whether you're rich or poor, young or old, more educated or less educated, sufficient restorative sleep has important implications for physical health, for quality of life, for psychological well-being, and for cognitive functioning. The scientific understanding of the benefits of sleep to the individual are expanding every day. For physical health alone, we know that sleep impacts heart health, metabolism, the immune system. Sleep is also essential for learning and memory consolidation. The list of benefits goes on and on. And when we step back and think about the societal consequences, let's think about public safety. Drowsy driving is responsible for up to a third of deadly automobile accidents. Drowsy driving may be a bigger issue than drunk driving. Oops. So now I'll touch on the three most prevalent high-risk sleep patterns. First, adequate sleep duration. You probably already know that getting enough sleep is important for your health. But it's not just about getting enough sleep, it's about getting the right amount. Both short and long sleep duration are associated with a range of adverse health outcomes, including mortality. So you're probably wondering, what's the right amount? For adults, it's somewhere between 7 and 9 hours. And for children and adolescents, it's a minimum of 9 hours per night. Unfortunately, 90% of teenagers are not meeting that recommended amount. Sleep apnea, another prevalent condition, is characterized by breathing pauses and breathing lapses during sleep. It's prevalent in 5 to 10% of the population and highly underdiagnosed. Historically, it's most diagnosed among women. And with the rise in obesity we've witnessed, we've also seen rising rates of apnea. And now insomnia. Insomnia is a condition characterized by trouble falling asleep, trouble staying asleep, and waking up too early. Insomnia is prevalent in up to 25% of the population. Both insomnia and apnea are associated with a range of adverse health and social consequences, including lost economic productivity. So now that we've established that there are immense benefits to sleep and that sleep deprivation and sleep disorders are extremely common, it would be easy for me to pitch that sleep is a public health problem. Sleep deprivation is a public health problem, maybe even a crisis. At the very least, we can affirm what the Institute of Medicine declared in 2006, that sleep deprivation and sleep disorders are an under-recognized public health problem. But my angle on this is a little different, and that distinction is important. Sleep deprivation and disorders are not just a public health problem. They are a matter of social justice. Socially disadvantaged populations are at the highest risk of not meeting their sleep needs. This is a social justice problem because the unfair distribution of sleep patterns across society contributes to the emergence and persistence of disparities. And by disparities, I mean differences along economic lines, differences along social lines, and differences in health. Let me start by describing 3 sociodemographic factors in which we observe alarming disparities in sleep. First, education. Using 4 decades of time use data, we have observed that more educated people are more likely to sleep the recommended amount than less educated people. People with less than a high school education are 40% more likely to be short sleepers and 80% more likely to be long sleepers than people with a college education. Similar patterns are observed when you look at education and how when you look at insomnia and sleep apnea. People with lower levels of education have higher prevalence of sleep disorders. Next, let's move on to neighborhood context. People who live in densely populated urban areas have shorter sleep durations than those who live in the non-central city areas. Further, people who report that their neighborhoods are highly disordered have more sleep disturbances than those who live in more ordered neighborhoods. Even among school children, we find higher rates of sleep apnea in worse neighborhoods than in better neighborhoods. And finally, let's talk about race. As you may already know, there are large health disparities by race in this country. When framed in terms of life expectancy, there is more than a 5-year life expectancy gap between black men and white men. A disparity also exists by race for sleep. Black men, or not just black men, compared to whites, blacks have shorter sleep duration, spend less time in bed, have less efficient sleep, and take longer to fall asleep than whites. In one Chicago-based study where they collected objective data on sleep, they found the difference in sleep duration between black men and white men was an hour, night after night. And when you compare the sleep duration of black men to white women who are sleeping the longest, the disparity is even bigger. Thinking back to the many benefits of sleep and the negative consequences of sleep deprivation, this disadvantage by race persists day after day. Unfortunately, African Americans still endure discrimination. Discrimination in the labor market, discrimination in the real estate market, in the consumer markets, and in the credit markets. Perhaps it is not a surprise that they also experience a disadvantage when it comes to sleep. My colleagues and I hypothesized that part of the reason that we see differences between blacks and whites in terms of sleep might be due to this experience of racism. We found that individuals who report that they are treated differently because of their race, even among blacks, are more likely to report sleep disturbances. So based on these disparities, I wanted to know, in adults, I want to know, when do they begin? Are we born with them, or when do they start? I looked at a national birth cohort study and found that there are differences in bedtimes and bedtime routines by race and by education as early as the preschool years. And this got me thinking, could this be setting kids on trajectories to have lower health outcomes, lower cognitive outcomes, worse behavioral outcomes? So we investigated the longitudinal data to see, are people without bedtime routines at age 3 having worse outcomes at age 5? First, we found that lack of bedtime routines was associated with both worse sleep and shorter sleep duration. Then we found, and in contrast, we found that individuals or children who had story time at night, reading and singing, had better cognitive and behavioral outcomes at age 5. You might imagine if you're a single mom working multiple jobs, coming home late at night, you might not have either the availability or the energy to institute regular bedtimes night after night. You can now see how irregular sleep patterns can get passed on night after night, generation after generation. We also found that watching television at night predicted trouble sleeping. Now, this applies to everybody. It's not just about disparities. Whether you're a toddler, a teenager, or an adult, watching an illuminated screen right before you fall asleep is probably the least sleep-promoting thing you can do. The light emitted from the screen suppresses the sleep-promoting hormone, melatonin, and thereby delays your natural sleep drive. And the National Sleep Foundation conducted a poll in 2011 and found that 95% of Americans use a screen-based technology in the hour before bedtime. We are all guilty of it, and it is time to put those screens down. So there are many other important areas in which sleep is socially patterned, and these also relate to disparities. I'll touch on a few right now. First, social and marital relationships matter. Married people sleep better than single people. And people in good relationships sleep better still. Employment matters. It turns out having a job, or most jobs, are good for your sleep. You wake up on a regular schedule, and you have a purpose to your day. The exceptions are if you work irregular hours or have a difficult workplace quality. We've also found that an American lifestyle can be detrimental to sleep. You might say, what do you mean by that? But we found that first-generation immigrants to this country are better sleepers than the rest of us. The more they take on American lifestyle characteristics, the worse their sleep is. In public health, there's a term for this. It's called negative acculturation, and it exists for sleep as well as other health behaviors. Finally, I want to mention mental health. Mental health is intricately linked with sleep. Both anxiety and depression are causes and consequences of poor sleep. Now, this bidirectionality is possible for many of the factors I've noted. But when poor sleep is both a cause and a consequence of social disadvantage, this creates a vicious cycle from which it is difficult to escape. And that leads me directly in to thinking about the societal consequences. If the very people who are the most socially disadvantaged and most need that extra boost to function better during their days wake up the least prepared, then they are at a disadvantage throughout every aspect of their day. Now, it might be okay if they're disadvantaged on the subway, where it might be okay to fall asleep. But if they are disadvantaged in the classrooms where they should be learning, this sets them on a path. And if they're disadvantaged in their workplace where they should be productive, this also further disadvantages them. And they are also disadvantaged in their families where they should be engaged and responsive. So what can we do about this? There are many things we could do about this. First, I'll start with the individual and public health campaigns. We need to increase education about the importance of sleep and sleep hygiene. This means encouraging regular bedtimes and routines, increasing exercise in the day, decreasing caffeine in the afternoon, and eliminating screen time before bed. Nice try on that one. We also need to increase access to treatment for sleep disorders to all members of society. And we need to implement policies that change our schedules and address sleep disorders. Examples of such policies include delaying high school start times. Other examples include screening truck drivers for sleep apnea and getting them treated. But I want to ask you this. Is this enough? Drawing on the work of Michael Marmot and other social epidemiologists, I believe that limited autonomy and lack of control of your daily life is at the root of our sleep problems. And if lack of control over your life is the cause of many people's sleep problems, then just telling them to change their schedules isn't going to help because they don't have the control to do so. Instead, we need to think about and implement policies and programs that facilitate and empower individuals to gain or regain this control over their lives. Examples of such policies include things like high-quality or universal high-quality pre-K, which has been shown to have lasting implications for individuals' capabilities later into life. Other examples of policies might include raising the minimum wage or improving housing and living conditions among the poor. Now, these might sound like big dreams, especially for a sleep researcher, but I believe that only through broad social policy can we work to address sleep disparities and other inequalities. I have 3 take-home points. First, the social patterning of sleep falls along lines of socio-demographic disadvantage. Second, these disparities in sleep are a matter of social justice and public health policy. And finally, sleep deprivation and sleep disorders are a mechanism through which disparities emerge and persist. Thank you very much for your time.